What is up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a review of my absolute favorite film camera, the Nikon F801s. So, if you're new to this channel, I put out new videos every single Monday on photography and photography-related topics. I do video essays, I do gear reviews, I talk about film photography, and I do street photography POVs. Pretty much a mixed bag of everything that a photography lover might enjoy watching. So if you love photography, go and check out the rest of my videos and maybe subscribe to my channel. And if you like this video, you find it helpful, do hit that like button because it does really help me out. So, the camera, the Nikon F801s. I absolutely adore this camera. I have taken it with me everywhere. It's been across the country, it's been up mountains, it's been to beaches and hikes and everything with me, and it has served me very, very well. I used to think film photography was really daunting, and I've kind of talked about my film journey on this channel before, but basically I started with a disposable camera, and then I upgraded to a really cheap point and shoot, and then from there I was ready to kind of jump into the deep end and buy a nice film camera that would allow me to control the settings. And so I went to Photo, and I was basically just like, hey, I want something that is as intuitive as possible. I'm not big on the knobs and dials, and I'm kind of terrified of learning how to operate a film camera, so whatever you got that's easy to use but still has control. And he showed me this camera, the Nikon F801s, and he was like, this is probably exactly what you need. And I was like, hey, that's a Nikon. I shoot Nikon. And he was like, oh, even better. So I got it for $100, and he showed me how to use all of the things that I would need to use, change the ISO, the shutter speed, and the aperture, and I was ready to shoot my first roll. And on my first roll, every single photo turned out. I didn't lose any frames. So if you are new to film, I would totally recommend this camera, or at least one like it. All of the Nikon digital era film cameras are excellent. So without further ado, let's get into the specs of this camera. So it's a 35mm film camera, and it operates with AA batteries. In my experience, it does have a really good battery life. I'm pretty sure the only thing that takes up most of the battery life is rewinding and loading the film, because that's like an electric motor. But yeah, I've only changed the batteries once, and I've had it for a little over a year. The camera was manufactured between 1988 and 1991, which makes it a digital era film camera, which is why it's got that little LCD screen on the top. That was exactly what I wanted, with something that had all the functionality and intuitiveness of my digital camera, but captured images on film. I bought mine for $100, but I actually see them online for between $65 and $90. I think you can get one. So absolutely, that's a good price point for what you're getting, and you'll see throughout this video that that is a pretty decent price point to pay. So one thing that sets this apart from other film cameras is that it has a really good, really fast autofocus due to being from the digital age, which is excellent. The autofocus is super sharp. It's even sharp in low lighting conditions. I have yet to encounter lighting conditions that are too dark for the camera to focus, which is excellent. It does only accommodate lenses with an F mount, so the autofocus won't work and the aperture control won't work if you load on a digital lens. So you can, I've put my 24-70 digital lens on it and it does work, but it stays at F22. And it doesn't use autofocus. And so I would highly recommend getting some film lenses if you're gonna use this. I only have one film lens that works with it, but it's a 50mm, which is pretty much all I would really ever want. I haven't felt the need to get any more lenses yet. It also has a built-in light meter, which is, in my experience, fairly accurate. It does tend to overexpose things slightly, but I've also been accused of underexposing my images, so it might just be overexposed to my taste, you know? But the light meter is incredibly handy, especially if you're just new to photography and you're not very good at guessing what the settings should be. Shutter speed, aperture, ISO, that kind of balance is just in my head, but if you are new to photography and it's not, use the light meter. Oh my God, it is so helpful. The light meter is visible on the top, on the LCD screen, but it's also visible through the viewfinder if you tilt the camera in a certain way. So you can see while you're shooting if you are exposing it properly. It also has several different exposure modes. So it's got full auto, it's got aperture priority, shutter priority. I would recommend shooting in full manual. That's what I always shoot with. I don't even think I've tried out the other modes. I certainly haven't tried out auto. That just seems like a bit of a risk with film, and since there is a light meter, I don't really see a reason to use auto, but do you? It's there, it's available. It's also got quite a fast shutter speed, so it goes up to 1/8,000th of a second, which is quite a bit faster than my other digital era Nikon film camera, which only goes up to 1/6,000th of a second. So I think this is kind of a primo model, and it will also keep the shutter open for as long as 30 seconds. I have never tried a long exposure with this camera, but it seems cool that you can do it. 30 seconds you could do astrophotography with that if you wanted to. And another fun feature that it's got is different film advance modes. So it's got just regular advance, but it's also got a multiple exposure mode that will accommodate up to 9 different exposures. I didn't know that before doing the research on the specs for this video. And now that I know that, I'm like, well, shoot, I really got to try that out. Like, I am super curious about the double exposure mode. I will try that out at some point in the very near future and perhaps make another video on it. But yeah, that was really, really cool. And also, in terms of like film advancing and rewinding, it does have an automatic rewind, which is excellent, and it takes about 10 seconds for a 24 exposure roll to fully rewind. It doesn't keep the leader. Usually, I think you can set it so that it will keep the leader, but I have not figured that setting out. So it doesn't keep the leader. I gotta buy a leader retriever, it's on my gear list. And that's just something to keep in mind if you are planning to shoot an entire roll of double exposures. Yeah, in addition to all of these perks, it's got other perks that we're used to seeing exclusively on digital cameras, like autofocus, but it's also got a self-timer that can count between 2 and 30 seconds if you want to take a selfie with this. And it's got a flash synchronization capability, so I can put my strobe trigger on the top of it and it will work with my strobes, which is really, really cool and extremely useful. And finally, all of these modes and all of these functionalities can be controlled on the LCD screen at the top. You can view absolutely everything that's going on in the camera. And also, a lot of them can be viewed inside the viewfinder. So it's very intuitive, very accessible. One of my biggest complaints of cameras that don't have that screen is that I just don't know what mode it's in at any given point. And another one of my like consistent problems with gear is that they will have like 20 different functions, but only 2 buttons to control those functions. All my lights are like that. It's a total pain in the ass. This camera is not like that. This camera has buttons for each function pretty much, or at least makes it very intuitive to figure out how the buttons control those functions. We love that. I am not a big gear person. I prefer to just like get the absolute easiest thing that's gonna allow me to capture the photo that I wanna capture. So if you're like that, this camera, it's for you. Let's talk about my experience with it. I typically shoot digitally on my Nikon D780, and I found that the controls, particularly the shutter button, are so similar on my Nikon F801s that like I've had them both around my neck at the same time and accidentally taken a picture on film thinking it was on my digital camera because they are very similar weights and they have a very similar hand feel. The layout is extremely similar. If you're used to shooting digital with Nikon, then you'll find this very intuitive. Take a shot every time I say intuitive in this video. I've shot in studio with this camera, and like I said, it does accommodate a strobe trigger, so I've shot with strobes with it, but I find the metering is very difficult. Like the light meter is kind of useless when you're shooting with strobes because what it's seeing is different than what it's going to be shooting. So I've had to guess and test a lot, and a lot of the ones that I've shot come out kind of murky and underexposed. Like this was taken with a strobe, but you would never know it. I think this was on 400 ISO film too. So I think for this one I kind of overcranked my aperture because it was a 400 ISO and my shutter speed had to be like under 1 out of 200. So yeah, kind of murky, still kind of working on figuring out how to use it with strobes, what settings work the best with strobes for which film stocks, blah, blah, blah. But I've done a lot more studio photography since that I need to get developed, so it's not in this video, but we'll see if that turned out. Stay tuned on my Instagram, I'll probably post some of it on my story. But yeah, so it's difficult to meter with strobes. I've also found it difficult to meter with higher ISO films. I mentioned that the meter tends to come out a little overexposed, but with higher ISO films, it comes out like a lot overexposed. Like here's some Cinestill 800T that was shot in daylight, and here is some Portra 800 that was shot. You kind of see what I mean? And here's some Fuji 800, Fuji Superior 800 maybe, that was shot in daylight. So yeah, they all kind of come out overexposed, and this is me intentionally underexposing it according to the light meter. So if I paid attention to the light meter, it would be even more overexposed. So just keep that in mind. It's not very good at metering higher ISO films. That said, when I'm shooting with Cinestill, it will say that it's too dark to shoot, and then I'll take the photo anyways, and then it'll come out kind of nice. So I think maybe photos overall will turn out a little bit brighter than the light meter thinks they're going to. That could also just be my particular camera. I don't know, you'll have to guess and check, but that's been my experience. Another thing in my experience is that it is not very good at shooting in the extreme cold, which I would not expect it to be good at shooting in the extreme cold. My digital camera is also not good at shooting in the extreme cold. I was kind of hoping that because it is more mechanical that it would be a little bit better at it, but no, it's not. So I've taken it out in -15 and it was fine, which was very impressive. And I skied with it and I got some great photos at the top of the mountain and it stayed alive all day and was totally fine. I've taken it out in -30 and it froze up almost immediately and did not come back on for like 2 hours. And I was like, are you okay? But it was okay. So somewhere between -15 degrees Celsius and -30 degrees Celsius, it stops working. I would just not take it out in extreme cold at all if I was you. But if you do, it does come back on and it does seem very durable, which brings me to my next point. The thing that I really like about this particular camera is that it is very light and very durable and has minimal kind of moving parts. So I don't have to worry about things getting jostled around. You know, a lot of it is digital. With a classic film camera, because it's all mechanical, it's got all of these very fine-tuned parts that you can't really jostle and shake around and like treat like crap. But because this camera is digital era, it's got less of those moving parts. A lot of it is just stored on a chip, and so you can jostle it around quite a bit more than you could jostle around something kind of fancier. So I throw it in the bottom of my bag. I've taken it hiking with me. I've taken it skiing, like I said, and because it's somewhat cheap, if it did get injured on any of these outings, I wouldn't feel completely terrible about it because I'm not out a ton of money. So I can take it places that I can't really take my digital camera, and I can still get really nice professional shots in those places. So it kind of replaced the point and shoot for me. I used to just have a point and shoot that I would carry around, or like an Instax Mini or something, but I can take this camera instead. One downside, and this is a big downside for me, is that the battery cassette is very flimsy, which sucks because the rest of the camera is super like hard body, durable, hard plastic. The battery cassette is extremely flimsy. It's made of like these like little thin wires of plastic, and mine broke. At one point I was bike riding, I had it on, the battery cassette popped open just randomly. I think there's like a screw at the bottom, and I think the screw had gotten loose and it just flew apart. And the battery cassette landed and it just like sprang apart. Like, you remember in like the 2000s when you drop your phone and the whole thing would just go like the battery compartment, the phone, all different places, the case, gone. It's like that. Ever since then, I have had a really hard time getting it to turn on. So I'll have to load the batteries in like a very specific way and like kind of massage the compartment once it's in there to get the contacts to all line up and everything. And if it gets jostled at all, then the contacts will come apart and it just doesn't work. So yeah, that's really unfortunate. I can't find a replacement battery cassette anywhere online either, so I'm gonna have to like fandangle something. But right now it is turning on and it's working pretty well. I left it on the shelf for a little while and it seems to have fixed itself a little bit. So hopefully that stays fixed, but it also means that I'm not gonna like take out the battery compartment to show you the damage because I don't wanna risk it not being able to turn on again. So just take my word for it, the battery compartment is not very sturdy. And it could easily be more sturdy, you know, like it doesn't even need to be a thing that slides out. Like every other camera I've ever shot with just has like a little thing that you flip open and then put the batteries in. No, this one has like a drawer that you slide out and then put the batteries in, and that drawer is really flimsy. So it's dumb. That part is badly designed. But yeah, that is my whole review of this camera. I hope you guys found it helpful. I hope you found the photos interesting. I hope this helps you decide what kind of film camera you want to buy. If you are a Nikon user, I would highly recommend something like this. There's a lot of them available online. They're a very accessible price point, in my opinion. Absolutely, go out and get yourself one of these. Start shooting film. If you like film photography, you will not regret it. Thank you guys. I will see you next Monday. And in the meantime, don't forget to keep shooting. Bye, guys.